Sam Kahn, theathletic.com. There he is, always with us, most every Thursday, back and forth a few days during the season as what he has to write and cover too. Sam, thank you for being a part of the show today. The season's over. It's been over since late Monday night, but there's still kind of some summary reflections or whatever. What stood out to you the most, and I know there might have been 20 things, about just what you saw, what we saw from the first ever 12-game playoff?
First off, it was a lot of fun. And I mentioned this when I got back from the Cotton Bowl in the semifinal, which was my last game because I was following Texas all the way through until they got eliminated. But I mentioned to a few people when I got back of how much I really enjoyed covering this playoff. It was so unique in that we got a home game in the first round for several teams. Then you had the bowl games, but they're different stakes because it was no longer just four teams involved. It was, I got to see Arizona State and I got to see Cam Scatterbo in person. And after watching him all year long on TV and from afar, and he had one of my 3 Heisman votes. He was on my ballot. And I never felt more validated than I did after that game against Texas, watching him fight through and watching that team fight through. And you really learned a lot about them. You learned a lot about all these other teams that we don't really see. And I just love that it invoked every part of the country. Every region of the country was represented, as opposed to just having the championship chase concentrated just either one or two parts of the country. And so I thought it was a smashing success. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's things you can tweak and things you can do to make it better. But overall, I liked what we ended up with. I thought the 2 teams that made the final were very deserving. And I think at the end of the day, we got the best team at the end that won it.
Sam, what do you think about the immediate futures for both of them as you go into next year? Do you think that there will be more rebuilding or reloading?
I think for Ohio State, I look back and they're going to lose a lot of their guys. And I was looking through their list the other day, and they actually bring back a little bit more than I realized. They Caleb Downs, of course, is going to be back. Carnell Tate should be back. Jeremiah Smith should be back. They're going to lose Howard and the running backs and Denzel Burke and all those other guys, both edge rushers who are really, really good. But I think they have a chance to still be decent. I was feeling pretty good about Notre Dame until I saw those 2 offensive linemen hit the portal. That one kind of got me scratching my head a little bit, because with as much as they had coming back on the line, with Love and Jadarian Price coming back, with Jaden Greathouse back, and just the schedule that I was looking at their schedule, it's not super daunting next year. I looked at them as a team that could possibly make another run back to the playoff, but certainly something to watch for them with the offensive line. And how is Steve Angeli going to end up turning out as the quarterback if he ends up being the guy, or is it going to be CJ Carr? So I'm fascinated to watch that battle. Obviously at Ohio State, you wonder if it's going to be Julian Sayin. I think that's what we probably expect to happen. So fascinated to see how he steps in. The fact that they did not take a big-time veteran transfer quarterback in the portal tells us, I think, that they feel really good about where they are at that position. So I don't think either of these teams are slam dunks necessarily to get back to the semis or to the championship, but I think they'll still both be good teams that should very much be contenders for the 12th team next year.
Sam, I'm not trying to make too much of it, but there has been this storyline surrounding the conferences, especially this year with all the realignment and the playoff and all that comes with that. I guess, do you feel like there's an actual shift occurring here with the Big Ten winning back-to-back and all of that? I don't think the SEC's going anywhere. Nobody probably does, but does it feel like a shift, or does it feel like just kind of a moment where, hey, the Big Ten happened to win a couple in a row?
Yeah, I struggle to say definitively that it's a huge shift, because when we see the draft happen in 3 months, we know where the conference is going to produce the most players, and even the most players per capita. It's going to be the SEC. And so that's not going to change. But I will say the SEC was the conference where you are most likely to build a super team. Ohio State is one of the few exceptions to that, where they were able to build one. And I think the era of the super team is going away. And as the era of the super team goes away, then it makes it that much harder for everybody, including those at the top of the SEC. And, oh, by the way, you start looking through these SEC schedules, and I was looking through this the last couple of days. Nobody's schedule is easy anymore, because there were some times where if you were in the SEC East, your conference schedule was maybe not that daunting. Plus, your non-conference schedule was kind of weak. if you're in the SEC West, you had a juggernaut to go through, but maybe it was a couple of down. Maybe Auburn was down and Arkansas was down, and maybe you could, escape with only a couple to two or three really, really tough games when I'm talking about championship level teams. Now, with a 16-team conference and you added one of those teams as a bona fide power now and another is only a few years removed from being one, it's really going to be hard to be a dominant team coming out of that conference, I think, on a consistent basis. I don't think anybody's ever going to have the type of run that Alabama did under Saban in the SEC for the foreseeable future, just with all the variables that we have from the portal, from NIL, and the roster movement that goes on, plus how big and thick and deep the conference is. I think it's just going to be really hard to have a real dominant power. So when you don't have that dominant power, then you're going to have teams that are a little bit more vulnerable coming in, that are going to have a few more flaws coming into the playoff, and that's going to make it harder to make it all the way through. So I don't want to say that the SEC is down by any stretch, but I do think it's going to cause a little bit of a reevaluation from everybody outside the SEC of, hey, let's just not automatically give them favored nation status because they haven't had a team in the title game in the last 2 years. That there is at least a little bit of something that we can say, okay, let's look closer at each one of these teams, which we should be doing anyway. We should be looking at these resumes, not by conference, but by individual team. What is on your resume? What have you done? Who have you beaten? How good are you really? Not how good of a conference did you come from?
With the fact that 12 teams got in, and there were games, some that were more wide open as far as margin, then there were some that were just classics. Even if, like, the Texas-Ohio State game was a 14-point margin, it was still, my God, right there at the doorstep to be tied. What team that didn't get in do you think, based on what you saw and remember, may have been able to make a dent?
Did you know that most calorie deficit calculators don't work? My dietitian recommended the Lasta to me, and it turned out to be the only one that got my calorie deficit right. Thanks to it, I lost 14 pounds in 1 week. Ready to kickstart your journey to healthy weight loss? Calculate your ideal calorie deficit using the Lasta app right now.
Well, they weren't going to be close to getting in because I think they were a little bit too far off the radar at this point in the rankings. But South Carolina is a team that toward the end of the year that I thought was playing some really good ball, and that if you had to go up against them and Lenore Sellers and some of the fast freakish dudes they have on the roster, I think they would have caused some problems in the bracket. I think Shane Beamer's doing a great job there, and I think the roster talent, the way he's acquired guys and the way they've recruited, I think has been really good, and the development seems to be there. They're bringing Lenore Sellers back, obviously, but they're going to have a lot to replace, so I don't know if they're going to quite get there. I wasn't really as big on the Ole Miss train. To me, they had too many clunkers for my taste that they should have taken care of. But I think South Carolina was a team that if I would have picked another, and then I'll give you one more, and it's a team, and I know you guys have talked about it, but everybody just seemed to forget about them. That I think they were a good team. I don't know if they would have gone deep in the bracket, but I think they would have had a shot to win a game. Is BYU. I thought BYU was a really good team. They were a really good defensive team. They could run the football. I think Jake Retzloff was a gamer. I think they would have been fascinating to watch in the playoff, but it seems like after the Kansas loss, everybody just forgot about him, even though their resume isn't really that much different from SMU's. And, oh, by the way, they beat SMU head-to-head. But I think they would have been interesting to see in the bracket as well.
Sam, I want to go back to something you said about looking more at the teams, like who you beat, all these different things, not what conference you're from or all that. Is this why we need, like, how do you get lobbying out of this thing? Because that's the key. It's like, look, it doesn't, like, the 12 people on that committee is 12, right, or however many it is. But the people in the room, that jury is the one who decides what goes and who goes. And they don't really, because of what their process is supposed to be of watching film, discussing among themselves, what Greg Sankey or anyone else says, Brett Yormark, anybody, shouldn't matter because that's all just noise, right? So how do they, because they are human, how do you get that out of the equation?
I don't think you ever will, because the easiest way to do it is the way they're not going to go. is give every conference champion a bid. Give every, and I mean all 10 conferences, give every single conference champion a bid, and then however many at-larges you want to put in there, go for it. And then you can lobby about the at-larges. But if we want to say, if they want to solidify and guarantee, I'm not in favor of this, but if they want to guarantee the 4 power conferences one bid, or maybe even 2 bids, and then leave one for the best group of 5, I think that would take some of the lobbying out, because if you're guaranteeing, the more you guarantee spots that you can't, if you guarantee you have a clear qualification, so it's just like the NFL playoffs, you have a certain metric, or you have a certain level to reach, and if you reach it, then you're in, and if you don't, then you're not, or you're subjected to the at-large process. It's as simple as that. And I don't understand why that's such a radical thing with college football. I understand the sport is different, and it's so large, and it's hard to, you can't get everybody to play everybody, because it's just, there's too many teams that do it. But I don't understand why it's so radical, and why we can do this in the FCS, but why we can't do it in the FBS. It boggles my mind.
Sam, it appears the Dallas Cowboys have found their next head coach in Brian Schottenheimer. Nothing official, so, there could obviously be a curveball somewhere, but if that is in fact the case, that means Deion Sanders is likely staying put in Boulder, Colorado. I know it's kind of already sort of pointing that way, but now it feels like we can start sort of talking about what does year 3 look like in your opinion, with the turnover of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, and just obviously massive news for Colorado if this is the case.
Yeah, no doubt. Certainly a lot of us, we would have placed wagers 2 years ago on whether or not Deion would have been the coach of Colorado in 2025, I think a lot of us would have been losing that bet right now, because I certainly would have placed money on the fact that he'd be done as soon as his sons were done. So that would be huge for them, because, look, whatever you want to say about his bravado and his personality, the guy has done a good job in terms of turning that program around and making them relevant again. I mean, they were in the hunt for a Big 12 title last year, and that's way more than any of us, I think, would have predicted. Even the most optimistic people, I thought, pegged them at maybe a 7 or 8 win team. And so to be in the conversation for a Big 12 title game berth at the end, I think was a massive step forward. It's not going to be as easy, obviously, because I think Shedeur and Travis, this was not a team that solely relied on just those two, because they've got a lot of other really good skill talent. I think of guys like Will Shepherd. I think of guys like Preston Hodge and some of these dudes that they got in the portal. Those were not just the only 2 guys, but they were a big chunk of the success of that team. And so replicating that's going to be hard. Getting the quarterback recruit from 25, Juju Lewis, I think that's going to be huge for them. I'm fascinated to see, is he going to play? Or I think they took Caden Salter in the portal from Liberty. So I assume he's going to be your bridge guy. So you get a veteran who I don't think is nearly going to be at the level that Shedeur is. I think Caden Salter is a good player, not an elite player in the way that Shedeur is, in my opinion. But certainly in the Big 12, I think good enough that he's going to be able to make some plays and help them bridge that gap until they get to Juju in 2026. So I think they're going to be a fun team, a fascinating team, and they're going to continue to be aggressive as they can in the portal. And I'll be interested to see how they fare as we move into the ref share era, if they're able to still be as aggressive and does Deion's name and brand and image and all that stuff still work for them in the same way. I don't have a reason to believe that it won't, but I'll be curious to see if it still works in that way.
That East-West Shrine game up in Arlington coming up on the 30th has a nice Colorado flavor. Shedeur, I think Wester among some of the others, even a couple of 2 or 3 defensive players. Couple of questions from the chat. Arizona State was obviously, out of all the 12 teams, in Indiana maybe, Boise, not a surprise. We knew from the beginning that they could be one of the favorites in the G5. But those 2 teams were, of the 12, I think, the biggest and nicest surprises. Do you see somebody simmering? Because if we say that we do, then they're not a surprise. Like South Carolina was almost a part of that too. Anybody on your radar for that right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say a surprise, but out of the G5 ranks, because they were in it this year, I was really interested in what UNLV has done in the portal so far under Dan Mullen. They did lose a lot, but I think they've taken a lot of good players as well. So I'm curious to them. The other one that has lost a lot, but they're a good program. They have been a winning program now for the last 3 years consistently, and I really love their coach, is Tulane. I think John Summerall is a star. I know they lost Mensah, and I know they lost the running back as well, and that's going to be really hard to recover from. But they I think, have had a really good, strong consistent run of success here. And it would not shock me if they end up being the group of 5 team that comes out of this at the end of the day. They took the Ball State transfer, Caden Samanza, out of the portal as their quarterback that's going to end up filling in for Mensa now that he's gone. So I think they're going to be a team that I'm going to look at. As far as the power conference teams, the one that made the playoff that was a surprise to us that we didn't expect at the end of this thing was Clemson. I have a feeling that maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I think Clemson has a real shot to make the playoff next year as an at-large or a conference champion and make a deep run, because I love the Tom Allen hire at defensive coordinator. You get Cade Klubnik, who's now a multi-year starter with the same offensive coordinator for multi-years. I think they've done a pretty good. They're starting to utilize the portal a little bit. They got a few impact guys, about 2 or 3 impact guys that they added to the roster. So that one is interesting. And then the other two that I would put, and I don't think they're huge surprises, but I think they're teams to watch that didn't make the playoff this year, LSU and Illinois. I think Bielema, I've always respected Bielema, and I've always thought he's a really good coach. I like what he obviously says Wisconsin. He had it going a little bit at Arkansas before it tailed off, but you have to respect the job he's done so far at Illinois. They bring a lot back. And then LSU, I think, is loaded, and they went all in the portal this year. I'm a huge Garrett Nussmeier fan. I watching him in person, I think he's got all the tools that you want, and I think he'll end up being one of the top guys in the 2026 draft. So getting him back is going to be huge, and they went heavy in the portal to supplement that roster. So wouldn't shock me at all to see LSU jumping in the mix here.
Got one more question, then I'm going to email you a question on a topic that I think we'll talk more about at 4:45 with Craig's Off the Radar from somebody in the chat, if you wouldn't mind responding to that when you get it. Avery Johnson. This guy's got the it factor, although they had to kind of grind through it. What is the ceiling, you think, with Avery Johnson's expectations at K-State next season?
I think it's still really high. I would still, as long as they have him, I think you still have to consider that team a Big 12 title contender. I know he had ups and downs last year, but it was really his first season as the guy, the full-time guy, unquestioned. Obviously, now that Will Howard was gone. And look, I think we have sometimes we get these outsized expectations for guys when guys step into these new roles and think that they're going to be perfect. I think we may suffer the same thing with Arch Manning next year when he steps into Texas. I think we're going to think that he's going to go in there and throw for 4,000 yards and win the Heisman Trophy. And his start against Ohio State on September 30th or August 30th is going to be his third career start. So I think it's easy to assume that quarterbacks are going to be like Tua or Trevor Lawrence and have that immediate success. But I think he's still a really talented player with a really high ceiling. He's obviously got to get better about taking care of the football. That was the biggest bugaboo for Avery. But I think that's something that's fixable. I don't think that's something that's inherent in you and that you can't get rid of. I think he's going to be aggressive. He's really confident in his talent. He's obviously a dynamic athlete. And as long as he's got that athleticism to build upon, the throwing lanes are going to be there. He's just got to be smart about it. It's just going to take more time, more coaching, more development. I think he'll be just fine. I think I'm excited to see how he does in his second year as the guy.
Hey, man, great to see you. Appreciate it, Sam. Sam Kahn, theathletic.com. I'll send you an email on a question that I think we'll have as a topic at 4:45 and get his feedback on that as well.